Good morning. I'm Renu Anand. Come on, let us discuss and analyze the important events of the story, Evans tries an O-level. As the story starts, in March, the secretary of the examination board receives a call from the governor at Oxford Prison asking if one of his prisoners can take the final exam in O-level German. And what is the name of the prisoner? Yes, James Roderick Evans, who has been taking night classes since September, so that's 6 months, because the prisoner says he is dead keen to get some sort of academic qualification. The governor is suspicious. He isn't sure if Evans is especially talented at German, but he is willing to let him sit for the exam because for the last 6 months he was the only student in the German teacher's class, and so basically he has had a private tutor for the past 6 months. The governor knows that Evans is not some highbrow academic kind of a person. He is a criminal and his sudden interest in German is uncharacteristic. However, he feels that the criminal should be given a chance and therefore he speaks to the secretary of the board. The secretary too bends to the governor's request to let Evans take the exam. He also, like the governor, agrees that they should give the criminal a chance to improve. And what is the query that he has? He wants to know if Evans is violent, but at once the governor assures him that Evans is quite a pleasant sort of a chap, though he is a bit of a card. What do you think the word card means? Card means that he is a strange fellow who is a thief and has often been caught for thieving. He is just a congenital kleptomaniac with a penchant or an inclination for imitations of Mike Yarwood. Who do you think is Mike Yarwood? Mike Yarwood was a stand-up comedian in the 1960s who used to imitate actors and other important people. The governor is about to add something else. What do you think that something else might be? Do you think he's got his suspicions? Do you think he wants to share with the secretary that Evans has escaped from the prison thrice and may try again? Well, he quickly decides against sharing the information and he thinks to himself, he'd look after that particular side of things himself. The governor explains that Evans has his own cell, so he can sit for the exam there, and he suggests that they ask a parson from St. Mary's Maggs to be the proctor, and the secretary agrees. Now, the fact that they ask for a parson or a priest means that the priest would not let any hanky-panky or anything wrong go on during the exam. We can see that the governor is worried because Evans is known as Evans the Break by the prison officers. James Evans has escaped 3 times from various prisons. He was going to be sent to a maximum security prison in the north, which is towards Scotland, but due to the wave of unrest up there, he was sent to Oxford Prison instead. The governor is determined to keep Evans secure because otherwise he is the one who will be disgraced. He doesn't, of course, consider Evans a significant threat, more of a persistent, nagging presence, and this is where he makes a mistake. Thinking about Evans's upcoming exam, the governor decides there is a possibility that Evans is truly passionate about German. Just a slight possibility, just a very slight possibility. So don't you think, children, he should have been more careful? Well, in early June, Evans attends his final night class in German before the big exam. His German teacher wishes him good luck in a thick German accent, and Evans awkwardly asks him to repeat himself. What does this show? That in the last 6 months, Evans has not learnt much German. The German teacher repeats his good wishes in England and reminds Evans that he doesn't have a cat's chance in hell of getting through. Why does the tutor say this? Is it because Evans has no knowledge of the German language, or does he feel that Evans has not put in any effort to learn the language, or do you think he has some knowledge of Evans's plan to escape and is warning him, or as we learn later, he is Evans's friend and is just teasing him? Evans interrupts breezily, claiming that he may surprise everybody. Well, Evans's reply, children, is ironic. What is irony? Irony, as you know, is when you say something but mean something different. So while the jail authorities may feel Evans is going to maybe pleasantly surprise everyone by doing well, or not do well at all, Evans is meaning that he is going to give everyone an unpleasant surprise by running away from the prison. The next morning, two prison officers, Jackson and Stevens, visit Evans. They are stereotypical prison officers, cold, gruff, and unfriendly. But are they really that? When they walk into Evans's cell, he is wearing his filthy-looking red and white bobble hat. Jackson, the senior prison officer, has already become warm enemies with Evans. What do you think the word warm enemies means? They keep saying nasty things to each other, just pulling each other's leg. We see that Jackson has become quite fond of Evans because he also calls him old son. The other man, Stevens, is a burly, surly looking man who is new to Oxford prison and to the prison officer profession in general. When Jackson gruffly greets Evans by calling him Einstein and reminds Stevens to confiscate Evans's razor before the proctor arrives, and to take away, he himself takes away Evans's nail scissors. This is something which dismays Evans. We will learn later why. Jackson tells Evans to clean himself up for his exam and to remove his filthy hat. Evans's hand immediately flies up to his hat. He smiles sadly and explains this is the only thing that has ever brought him any sort of luck in life, and that he especially needs the lucky charm for his exam today. Evans thinks to himself that Jackson would have probably a tiny core of compassion, which is true. Jackson compassionately lets Evans keep the hat. Just this once, then Shirley Temple. What do you think he means when he calls him Shirley Temple? Shirley Temple was a child actor, and he feels that he is being very childish and girlish by claiming that the hat is a lucky charm. Jackson thinks to himself that the only thing he genuinely hates about Evans is his long, wavy hair, and the hat will cover that hair. At 8:45 a.m., Reverend Stuart McCleary leaves his bachelor flat and makes his way across town to Oxford Prison, where the 2-hour exam is scheduled to begin at 9:15 a.m. Now, why is the time being mentioned again and again? Well, for Evans's plan of escape to be successful, children, each minute counts. In his briefcase, the proctor carries the proctor's form, the exam paper in a sealed envelope, a special authentication card from the examinations board, a Bible, because McCleary has to talk later that day at the Women's Guild on the Book of Ruth, a paper knife, and an issue of the Church Times. Some of these things are to create the impression that he actually is McCleary, Reverend McCleary, a man of the church. Again, let me point out the irony of the authentication card. The authentication card is actually not an authentic card because McCleary is an impersonator. After Evans washes up, Jackson pays him another visit. He orders Evans to clean up his cell and to take down the posters of pin-up girls on the wall. Evans nods. He does want to do that because he does not want a man of church, Reverend McCleary, to look at all those posters. Jackson is suspicious and he quietly asks Evans, how does he know that the proctor is a minister? Evans says that he may have seen it on the form earlier. Gesturing to the ceiling, Evans asks Jackson why is his cell bugged. Jackson reminds him that the prison officers have to be extra cautious with Evans. Why do they have to be extra cautious, children? Yes, because he has already escaped from various prisons thrice and he may escape again, and that the governor himself will be listening in on the exam. Evans thinks to himself that he has already accounted for that. Number 2 handkerchief was lying ready on the bunk. Exactly. They have taken away all the things with which he could hurt himself. What were those? His razor and his scissors, nail scissors. But Evans has other ordinary things that he can use. And what are they? Right. His hat and his handkerchief. So what does this show us about Evans's character, children? That he is a very creative person. He can make do with small items and use them to his advantage. As he leaves the room, Jackson brusquely tells Evans, "Good luck, old son." This shows that Jackson and Evans have become friends while Evans has been at the jail. Once at the prison, Reverend Stuart McCleary signs in and follows a silent prison officer who then hands him off to Jackson, who then hands him off to Stevens. Look at the number of people guarding Evans. What does this tell us, children? Yes, this tells us that the prison authorities are taking him quite seriously and so they are taking no chances. Meanwhile, the governor switches on the receiver to listen in to Evans's cell, wondering if all the safety precautions are a bit over the top. Suddenly, the governor realizes something he has overlooked. He has not told the prison officers to take a look at McCleary, who could have brought some weapon, which unknowingly maybe because he is a man of the church, which Evans can use. So he quickly orders Jackson to search McCleary. This shows us that the governor is taking no chances. Jackson calls McCleary back and searches him. The minister is patient and understanding as Jackson quickly looks through his belongings. He looks at a semi-inflated rubber ring in the briefcase and jokingly asks the minister, "Are you going swimming later?" McCleary stiffens and replies, "This is a tasteless little unpleasantry." And he says that this is a special cushion for his hemorrhoid problem. Jackson flushes pink and stammers an apology. By calling attention to the ring, children, Dexter makes us realize that this is an important item. The exam begins a few minutes behind schedule, made even later by Evans's insistence that he can't concentrate with Stevens hovering in the cell. Having overheard this through the receiver, the governor orders Stevens to leave, admitting that they may be overdoing the security. After a few administrative tasks, McCleary instructs Evans to write his index number and the center number in the corner of the exam paper. The test begins at 9:25 a.m. At 10:40 a.m., the governor receives a call from the examinations board. The assistant secretary with a special responsibility for modern languages asks what time the exam began, and explains that there's been an error on their end. There was a correction slip which some fool had forgotten to place in the examination package. Again, look at the word special. Remember the special authentication card and now the special responsibility for modern languages? Well, The governor wonders if the phone call is fake, a signal or distraction of some kind, but transfers the call to Jackson so that he can take care of it. To check if the call really did come from the examinations board, the governor dials their number, but all he hears are the staccato bleeps of an engaged line. The governor assures himself that this is to be expected because the assistant secretary is probably still speaking with Jackson. Minutes later, the governor hears McCleary reading off the corrections to the exams to Evans. The fourth word should read Goldenen, not Goldine, and the whole phrase will therefore read Zum Goldenen Lowen, not Zum Goldine Lowen. McCleary reads the phrase the Golden Lion twice, and the governor smiles because he knows some German and he understands. Having studied German in his youth, he smiles at the familiar words and adjectives. At that point, the governor's phone rings again. The magistrate's court needs a prison van and a couple of prison officers due to a remand case. After hanging up, the governor thinks to himself that perhaps the phone call was a fake, but he quickly reassures himself that he is being paranoid. Actually, the governor, don't you think, children, should have had more faith in his own intuition? No longer stationed inside the cell, Stevens now peers through the peephole into Evans's cell every 5 seconds. Stevens now peers through the peephole into Evans's cell for 5 seconds every minute, eventually transitioning to every 2 minutes. A task he finds entirely pointless given that Evans has barely moved. At the small table across from Evans is McCleary, who sits reading the newspaper, the Church Times, with one finger hooked in under his clerical collar, and he strokes his beard with his other meticulously manicured hand. Some time later, the governor is startled to hear noise coming from Evans's cell. The prisoner is asking for permission to drape his blanket over his shoulders. McCleary tersely gives him permission. 1 minute later, when Stevens peers into the peephole, he is surprised to see that Evans has a blanket around him. He wonders if this is a slight irregularity and should he report it to Jackson, who had told him to report anything fishy at all, but he decides against it because he feels he is overreacting. The prison is cold after all. Still, Steven decides to return to peeping from the peephole every 1 minute. He fears that, he may appear incompetent or stupid, but he is also suspicious. At 11:20 a.m., the governor listens as McCleary informs Evans that there are only 5 minutes remaining in the exam. Now, the governor keeps listening in, children. Why does he do that? Because he has a gut feeling Evans will escape. And maybe this something still gnawing away quietly in the governor's mind is what should have alerted him. He picks up the phone and he talks to. At 11:22 a.m., Jackson shouts for Stevens to come to the phone. The governor is on the line. The governor instructs Stevens to escort McCleary off the premises after the exam and to ensure that Evans is properly locked in his cell. At 11:25 a.m., Stevens escorts McCleary to the prison's main gates. He is bursting with pride that the governor had chosen him and not Jackson for the task. As the two men walk, Stevens privately observes that the proctor's Scottish accent sounds thicker than before. Children, don't you think this should have alerted the prison authorities? Because obviously the accent is a put on. He also notices that the proctor's long knee-length coat fostered the illusion that he had suddenly grown slimmer. Do you think he has grown slimmer, children? Why do you think Stevens feels that? Right. Probably the proctor was wearing two sets of the priest's uniform, one of which he has given Evans. After McCleary has gone, Stevens returns to Evans's cell to check on him. He also feels that he is being paranoid, like a TV show he had seen about a woman who could never really convince herself that she had locked the front door when she had gone to bed. And when he peers into Evans's cell, he meets with a horrifying sight. McCleary is slumped in Evans's chair and is drenched in blood. The blood is seeping through his beard, short hair and clerical collar. As Stevens shouts for Jackson, McCleary weakly presses the white linen handkerchief to his bleeding head. Children, do you remember the handkerchief which was lying on the bed? Well, Evans uses it, or rather McCleary uses it to hide his face. Clutching the German exam paper in one hand, McCleary murmurs that he knows where Evans went. There is noise and activity in the prison. Sirens wail, officers shout, heavy metal doors clang into place. When the governor arrives, McCleary shows him the German exam. A photocopied sheet had been carefully and cleverly superimposed over the last original blank page of the question paper. Clumsily translating the German, the governor reads, "You must follow the plan already something decided. The vital point in time is 3 minutes before the end of the examination, but something. Don't hit him too hard. Remember, he's a minister. And don't overdo the Scots accent when a police car whizzes up to the prison gates and Detective Superintendent Carter jumps out, demanding an explanation. Thus we see that the case is moving out of the hands of the prison authorities into the hands of the detectives." Wincing in pain, McCleary tells the men to go to Elsfield Way. The governor quickly realizes that the examination board headquarters are there in Elsfield. One of their employees must have been involved in Evans's escape. He tells Carter to take McCleary with him, since McCleary knows the most about the situation. Turning sharply to Jackson, Stevens and the governor demands to know who led Evans off the premises. Stevens stutters that it was him, but that the governor was the one who gave him the orders over the phone. The governor screams that it wasn't him who gave those orders. Oh, the call, children, was a fake. The governor thinks to himself that he had been using the phone at that time, trying unsuccessfully to get in touch with the examinations board. So who was it who gave the fake orders? This shows us that yes, Evans has friends even in the jail. The governor screams at Jackson for his stupidity. Jackson had searched Evans's cell for 2 hours the previous night, and yet the prisoner had managed to hide a clerical collar and shirt, reading glasses, a fake beard, a coat, and whatever weapons he attacked McCleary with. The governor turns his attention back to the instructions on the last page of the German exam, trying to make sense of what New Graben meant. He decided it means the town of Newbury. He shouts at a prison van driver to get Jackson and Stevens to the police station and to ask for Chief Inspector Bell when they get there. In walking McCleary out of the prison, Stevens had privately observed that the proctor looked suddenly thinner, suggesting that he had been wearing 2 layers of clothing. Actually, it wasn't Jackson who had been incompetent. It was Stevens who had noticed and yet not raised an alarm. The governor quickly gets Chief Inspector Bell on the phone to bring him up to speed. After this, Detective Superintendent Carter calls, explaining that they have left McCleary at Radcliffe Hospital, and once they got to the examination offices, McCleary was feeling very poorly, and they called an ambulance from the hospital and left him while they continued their search. Carter also mentions that McCleary spotted Evans near Elsfield Way and he looked to be heading back to the city. The governor explains his theory about Evans heading for Newbury and then hangs up, telling himself that finding Evans is a police job now. The governor was just another good for a giggle governor, gullible governor, that was all. But isn't he the one who is reading all the clues right? He's being a little hard on himself. The governor calls the hospital and asks after McCleary. The hospital clerk says they don't have a patient with that name, and the governor explains that McCleary was picked up from Elsfield Way. The clerk interrupts. He says that the ambulance had gone to pick up a patient from Elsfield Way earlier, but there was no one there. The fellow had gone. No one seemed to know where he was, just vanished. Suddenly the governor realizes his horrible mistake. What is the mistake that they have made? That McCleary immediately vanished points to the slippery criminal James Evans, suggesting that he in fact was the man who was disguised as the attacked and wounded McCleary. 15 minutes later, the prison officers discover the real Reverend Stuart McCleary bound and gagged at his flat, where he had been since 8:15 a.m. By that afternoon, everyone at Oxford Prison had heard the story. It had not been Evans impersonating McCleary who had walked out. It had been Evans impersonating McCleary who had stayed in. After a pleasant evening, Evans returns to which hotel? The Golden Lion Hotel. Remember Goldine Lowan? His new hat hides the wreckage of his closely cropped hair. It was a shame that Jackson had confiscated his nail scissors. Evans had to cut his hair with his razor blade instead, which was tough because he was fond of his hair. He is glad that Jackson at least let him keep his hat on for the exam. Old Jackson wasn't such a bad fellow, at least he thinks. As he climbs the stairs to his room in the hotel, Evans thinks about how it was such a jolly good idea for the fake McCleary to wear 2 clerical shirts and 2 clerical collars. What is a cleric? A cleric is a priest in the Christian church. It was tricky though, especially since one of the collars kept slipping off. There had been one panicky moment when McCleary had only just got his hand up to his neck in time to stop the collars springing apart when he trails off. It was also challenging to do all that fiddling about under the blanket to change the clothes. Luckily, Evans's friends had left him all the necessary supplies in the getaway car: clothes, soap, water, and an ordnance survey map of Oxfordshire. He is grateful to have such good and very, very clever friends. Evans opens the door to his room and suddenly freezes like a man who has just got a glimpse of the Gorgon. Who are the Gorgons, children? Well, Gorgons were monsters from Greek mythology, and whoever looked at the Gorgons turned to stone. So he freezes. He turns to stone when he sees sitting on his bed the very last man in the world that he expects to see or wants to see there, the governor of Oxford Prison. The governor quietly tells Evans it's no use trying to escape. He has the place surrounded. He only has 2 officers outside, but chooses not to reveal this detail to Evans. Visibly shaken, Evans sinks into a chair. After a few minutes of silence, he asks if the correction slip gave him away. Unable to conceal the deep satisfaction in his voice, the governor says, well, there are a few people who know a little German. But in his satisfaction, is he being a little too early or too premature? Evans relaxes, knowing he's been caught and there's no use fighting it. Evans excitedly tells the governor that the most important thing in his plot was the phone call that distracted Stevens and Jackson a few minutes before the end of the exam. The correction slip was important too, though, because it gave Evans the name of his hotel and it ensured that Evans's outside help, whoever called it pretending to be the examination board with a correction slip to the exam, knew exactly when the exam started so they could know exactly when to make the distracting phone call 3 minutes before the end of the exam. Evans also explains how he knew which Golden Lion hotel to go. McCleary had instructed Evans to write index number 313 in one box and center number 271 in another. Remember, as if there was some administrative task in filling out his exam sheet properly. Then in the getaway car, Evans looks up the 6-figure reference 313271, which led to the city of Chipping Norton. The governor says he figured that out too, and that is how he was able to track Evans down to Chipping Norton and to the Golden Lion, though he admits that he initially thought Evans had been heading for Newbury. Evans says that he had actually purposely left that clue as a red herring. The governor asks Evans if he really did understand German all this time, and Evans says that he just knew the gist. The governor also asks how Evans managed to cover himself in blood. Evans excitedly recounts his clever idea to have the fake McCleary bring the inflatable rubber ring under the pretense of needing it for a hemorrhoid problem. Evans knew that such a thing wouldn't be confiscated. Filling it with blood was easy. They got pig's blood from a slaughterhouse, but the issue was to keep it from clotting. To do so, you've got to mix your actual blood with 1/10 of his own volume of 3.8% trisodium citrate. The governor shakes his head with reluctant admiration, saying, "Come on, my lad," because why does he do that? This means that Evans is meticulous in his planning. He thinks about all the possibilities and whatever could go wrong and how it has to be set right. Yes, now the two men walk alongside one another down the stairs. The governor asks how Evans managed to communicate with the outside world. He's had no visitors or letters. Evans breezily replies that he has a lot of friends, including his German teacher. The governor is shocked, incredulous. He declares that the German teacher was from the technical college. Playfully, Evans asks, "Was he ever checked up upon him, sir?" In the lobby, a blonde receptionist informs the governor that the prison van is waiting out front. Evans winks at her and she winks back, which almost makes his day. Outside, a silent prison officer handcuffs Evans and loads him into the van. The governor says goodbye to Evans as if he was saying farewell to an old friend after a cocktail. What does this tell you about Evans, children? This tells us that people, even his adversaries, warm up to him. He's quite a likable chap. Evans brightly answers, "Cheerio, sir," and asks the governor if he knows any other modern languages besides German. The governor says no and asks why. Evans smiles and says that he noticed that the prison would be offering O-level Italian classes in September. That's all. The governor tells Evans that he might not still be at Oxford prison in September. Why do you think so? Because he has allowed such a mishap to occur while he is in charge. Pondering the governor's words deeply, Evans answers that the governor may be right. As the prison van merges onto the road, the silent prison officer who had loaded Evans into the van sharply tells the driver to speed up. It won't take them long to find out. In a thick Scottish accent, the driver asks where they should go. Who else do you think had that thick Scottish accent? Yes, the man who had impersonated Reverend McCleary. So now we realize that the driver is none other than Evans's friend who had impersonated McCleary and is now impersonating the prison van driver. Evans suggests Newbury. Once again, Evans has outsmarted everyone with a little help from his friends. The silent prison officer, who has made a few subtle appearance changes throughout the story, is revealed to be one of Evans's accomplices, while the driver is clearly the imposter McCleary. The fact that Evans suggests going to Newbury where the governor first looked for him, suggests that he might even want to be caught so that he can undertake the challenge of breaking out again. However, going to Newbury could also just be a clever way of hiding in plain sight. So, tomorrow, children, we are going to study the character sketches of these important characters from the story.